Some films are born from dreams too big to control. Lavish sets, endless rewrites, impossible egos, and exploding budgets, all leading to one question: how could it go so wrong? These were the gambles that almost destroyed the very studios that made them. Today, we revisit the wreckage of ambition and ego gone wild. Welcome to 17 movies that bombed so hard they nearly ended empires. Number 17. Heaven's Gate, 1980. At first glance, Heaven's Gate was meant to be a triumph. Director Michael Cimino had just won Oscars for The Deer Hunter, and United Artists trusted him with anything he wanted. The result was a slow-motion, financial apocalypse. Cimino built entire towns from scratch, demanded perfect clouds before shooting, and spent months reshooting scenes no one asked for. The story itself should have worked. A grand western about immigrants versus greedy land barons told through sweeping landscapes and operatic tragedy. But instead of glory, it became chaos. Extras collapsed during the endless takes. Horses were allegedly harmed on set. The editing room turned into a war zone as Cimino locked out executives who begged him to finish. When it finally premiered, critics didn't just dislike it, they destroyed it. Audiences walked out before the halfway mark. United Artists had spent $40 million but made less than $4. The studio folded soon after. Cimino's career never recovered, and Heaven's Gate became the symbol of director hubris. Yet, decades later, cinephiles reclaimed it as a misunderstood masterpiece, a visual poem that burned too bright for its time. It's proof that even the greatest vision can collapse under its own perfectionism. Number 16. Cleopatra, 1963. 20th Century Fox thought it was making the most beautiful movie ever filmed. Cleopatra would be an epic love story filled with gold marble and spectacle. But what began as cinematic glory turned into financial ruin. Elizabeth Taylor fell ill, halting production for months. Sets were torn down, rebuilt, and moved across continents. The film's budget ballooned from $2 million to over $40 million in 1963 dollars. The affair between Taylor and Richard Burton ignited international scandal. Paparazzi camped outside their villa, while religious groups demanded boycotts. The movie was less a film and more a real-life soap opera that consumed Hollywood headlines. Fox executives panicked as money evaporated, and studio staff were fired just to keep the project alive. When it finally released, Cleopatra dazzled, but could not earn back its mountain of debt. Though it became the highest-grossing film of the year, the profits vanished into the massive production cost. Fox nearly collapsed, selling off parts of its studio lot to survive. Still, Cleopatra remains a testament to excess, a film where art met vanity, and nearly destroyed a studio in its golden age. Today, its costumes still gleam its tragedy, echoing through every frame. Number 15. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, 2002. By the early 2000s, Eddie Murphy was comedy royalty. So when Warner Bros. Handed him $100 million to lead a sci-fi comedy set on the moon, everything seemed foolproof. But The Adventures of Pluto Nash became a legendary disaster, almost mythic in its failure. The story follows a nightclub owner on Lunar Colony who rebels against a gangster intent on cloning him. It sounded like Blade Runner meets Beverly Hills Cop, but what appeared on screen was lifeless. The jokes missed the mark. The effects looked dated even before release. Studio executives watched in horror as test audiences laughed in all the wrong places. After years of delays, reshoots, and re-edits, Warner Bros. Quietly dumped it into theaters. It made just over $7 million worldwide. Critics called it soulless. The studio wrote off nearly $100 million. Murphy distanced himself from it immediately, while Warner Bros. Restructured its comedy division after the loss. Yet, like many spectacular failures, Pluto Nash gained strange afterlife on late-night cable and internet lists of the worst movies ever made. It's a cautionary tale of how a sure thing can become a cosmic joke. The moon may have looked bright, but this film left a crater in Hollywood's balance sheets. Number 14. Cutthroat Island, 1995. In the mid-1990s, pirate movies were considered box office poison. Yet, Kuroko Pictures decided to gamble everything on a swashbuckling epic starring Gina Davis and directed by Rennie Harlin. They believed they could resurrect the genre with spectacle and charm. Instead, Cutthroat Island became the shipwreck that sank the studio itself. The premise was simple. Davis played a fearless pirate who joins her crew on a hunt for buried treasure while battling greedy rivals and mutinous allies. It should have been exhilarating, but behind the scenes, chaos ruled. The script was rewritten daily. Crew members quit in protest. Sets collapsed in storms on location in Malta. Harlan pushed the budget past $100 million while executives screamed from Los Angeles. When it premiered, the movie bombed instantly. The jokes felt forced, the adventure lifeless, and the chemistry non-existent. Critics shredded it, calling it the death of pirate cinema. Coralco went bankrupt. Within months of release, their assets liquidated in a blaze of unpaid debts. Cutthroat Island grossed barely $10 million worldwide, making it one of the biggest flops in history. Ironically, years later, Disney would revive the pirate genre with the massively successful Pirates of the Caribbean. But the ghost of Cutthroat Island lingered as the warning every studio remembered. It showed that even the mightiest dream can drown when money and ego steer the same ship. Number 13, The Mummy 2017. When Universal announced the Mummy reboot, it wasn't just another monster flick. It was supposed to launch an entire cinematic universe to rival Marvel. Tom Cruise signed on, sets were built around the world, and the marketing screamed, "Welcome to the dark universe." But behind the sandstorms lay chaos. Cruise allegedly seized control of the production, rewriting scenes and dictating tone, clashing with director Alex Kurtzman. The story couldn't decide whether it wanted horror, action, or mythology. Early test screenings were disastrous. Post-production ballooned the budget beyond $190 million. When The Mummy finally hit theaters, critics shredded it as a joyless CGI blur with no soul. The movie earned $410 million, not enough to save Universal's grand plans once marketing costs were counted. Within weeks, the dark universe collapsed. Planned films starring Johnny Depp, Javier Bardem, and Angelina Jolie were canceled. What was meant to resurrect the monsters instead buried them again. The Mummy became Hollywood's cautionary tomb, proof that no franchise can begin with a hollow heart. Number 12, Ishtar, 1987. Ishtar began with good intentions. Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman, two of Hollywood's biggest stars, wanted to make a buddy comedy about two hopeless lounge singers caught in Middle Eastern espionage. What could go wrong? Everything. Columbia Pictures gave director Elaine May carte blanche. She took the crew to the Moroccan desert where the heat destroyed equipment and tempers flared. Hoffman and Beatty clashed daily. Camels refused to cooperate. Crew members got sick. The budget ballooned from $20 million to over $50 million. Studio executives begged May to wrap it up, but she kept shooting, insisting perfection was near. When the film premiered, audiences were stunned for the wrong reasons. The humor fell flat, the pacing dragged, and critics tore it apart. Headlines mocked it as "Isn't Star Wars" and "The Disaster of the Year." Columbia lost tens of millions and nearly collapsed under the weight of its debts. For years, Ishtar became a Hollywood punchline synonymous with expensive failure. But over time, critics reevaluated it, discovering moments of absurd brilliance beneath the mess. It gained a strange cult following. In hindsight, it became the tragic comedy of ambition gone wrong. Proof that when egos burn too hot, even the desert can't hide the smoke. Number 11, The 13th Warrior, 1999. When author Michael Crichton adapted his own novel Eaters of the Dead into a major motion picture, everyone expected another Jurassic Park-style hit. Antonio Banderas led the cast, and Disney's Touchstone Pictures bankrolled it with a $90 million budget. The result, however, was chaos, cloaked in fog. The story followed an exiled Arab ambassador who joins a band of Norse warriors battling mysterious creatures in medieval Scandinavia. It should have been thrilling and exotic, but production was cursed from the start. Director John McTiernan lost control after test screenings bombed. Crichton himself returned to direct reshoots, rewriting entire sequences. Months turned into years. Costs skyrocketed to over $160 million. When it finally released, The 13th Warrior lacked identity. It was too dark for adventure fans and too pulpy for serious audiences. Critics dismissed it as incoherent. The film grossed only $30 million worldwide, sealing its fate as one of the decade's great flops. Disney quietly absorbed the losses and pulled back from adult-oriented adventure films for years. Yet among fans of historical action, the movie found redemption. Its stark realism and haunting score gained appreciation over time. It became the kind of failure people revisit out of curiosity. and stay for the strange poetry hidden within, a legend of wasted potential that nearly froze an empire. Number 10. John Carter, 1912. Few films represent the cost of misplaced confidence like John Carter. Disney believed they were launching the next Star Wars franchise. Based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' century-old novels, it had the pedigree of pulp legend. But the execution turned into financial ruin. Director Andrew Stanton, fresh from Pixar's glory, decided to blend sweeping Mars adventure with romantic tragedy. But he had never directed live action before. Visual effects ballooned costs to over $270 million. The marketing was a disaster. No one knew if John Carter was a sci-fi epic or a historical fantasy. The title itself confused audiences. When it hit theaters, the response was catastrophic. Despite decent reviews, the movie tanked, making barely $280 million worldwide, far below its break-even point. Disney took a loss estimated at $200 million, one of the worst in studio history. The executives who greenlit it were quietly reassigned. Plans for sequels vanished overnight. Years later, fans revisited the film, calling it underrated, a beautiful relic of imagination crushed by corporate mishandling. John Carter became an icon of overreach, the film that taught Disney to fear original live-action epics again. Sometimes even Mars can't save you from earthly mistakes. Number 9. The Goldfinch, 2019. Based on Donna Tartt's Pulitzer-winning novel, The Goldfinch was supposed to be prestige perfection. Amazon Studios and Warner Brothers poured more than $45 million into lush cinematography, A-list casting, and award season marketing. The cast included Ansel Elgort, Nicole Kidman, and Jeffrey Wright. Yet somehow, the film became one of the decade's coldest flops. Director John Crowley aimed for an intimate study of trauma, but studio demands stretched it into a sprawling 2.5-hour drama that lost its emotional center. Test audiences found it confusing and slow. Critics called it a masterpiece reduced to wallpaper. When it premiered in 2019, it made less than $10 million worldwide, a fraction of its cost. Amazon and Warner Brothers both suffered financial embarrassment, halting similar literary adaptations. Internally, executives admitted the film never found its tone. Too elegant for mass audiences, too superficial for art house acclaim. Today, The Goldfinch stands as a gilded failure, stunning to look at, impossible to feel. It's the kind of movie Hollywood makes when chasing trophies instead of truth, proving that even prestige can collapse under perfection's weight. Number 8. Waterworld, 1995. No movie symbolized Hollywood excess in the 90s quite like Waterworld. Universal Pictures believed they were creating a new post-apocalyptic epic, a Mad Max on the ocean starring Kevin Costner at the height of his fame. But what began as a bold idea turned into a financial hurricane. The plot followed a lone drifter navigating a flooded Earth, searching for dry land while battling pirates and betrayal. The concept was daring, the world immersive, and the production colossal. Yet every step was plagued by disaster. Sets built on the open ocean were destroyed by storms. Crew members nearly drowned. Kevin Costner and director Kevin Reynolds clashed repeatedly until Reynolds walked off mid-production. The budget soared from $100 million to over $175 million, making it the most expensive film ever at that time. When Waterworld premiered, audiences were intrigued, but critics mocked it as Watergate on the waves. It earned decent box office returns, but nowhere near enough to cover its staggering costs. Universal executives panicked as losses mounted, pushing smaller projects into cancellation. Over the years, Waterworld found new life through home video and theme park attractions, eventually turning a profit decades later. Yet its legacy remains a cautionary tale about ambition outpacing control. A reminder that sometimes the biggest risk is believing you can command the sea. Number 7. The Alamo, 2004. When Disney decided to remake The Alamo, they wanted prestige, history, and patriotism wrapped into one cinematic event. But what they got was an expensive disaster that nearly erased confidence in historical epics for good. Directed by John Lee Hancock and starring Dennis Quaid and Billy Bob Thornton, the film aimed for authenticity over spectacle. Sets were reconstructed plank by plank in Texas, costing millions. Production delays, droughts, and political disputes added chaos. Early cuts ran nearly 4 hours, forcing brutal edits that stripped away emotional depth. The budget ballooned past $100 million, while enthusiasm evaporated. When it finally hit theaters, audiences stayed away. The film earned just $25 million. Critics called it joyless. Disney quietly wrote off the loss and stepped back from serious period dramas for over a decade. Even the stars seemed eager to forget it. Still, the Alamo holds strange respect among historians for its realism and somber tone. It avoided the patriotic sheen of older versions and tried instead to humanize doomed men fighting for belief. It may have failed commercially, but it stands as proof that truth and tragedy often make uneasy companions on screen. Its canon still echoes quietly across forgotten reels. Number 6. Speed Racer, 2008. The Wachowskis wanted to create a family adventure that would redefine visual storytelling. Speed Racer was that dream, a neon explosion of color, sound, and optimism. But the dream collided with harsh reality when audiences rejected its sugar rush intensity. Based on the Japanese anime, the film followed the young racer Speed and his family as they battled corporate corruption and rival drivers across surreal tracks that defied physics. The visuals were groundbreaking, a kaleidoscope of digital art, but to many viewers, it felt overwhelming. Critics described it as sensory overload. Warner Bros. Spent over $120 million on production and even more on marketing. Test screenings predicted disaster. When it opened, box office numbers collapsed, immediately barely crossing $40 million in the US. The studio was stunned. The Wachowskis retreated from big-budget filmmaking for years, focusing on smaller visionary projects. Yet Speed Racer aged gracefully. Fans later hailed it as a misunderstood masterpiece, predicting the stylized cinema that would dominate the next decade. It turned from embarrassment into cult treasure proof that sometimes innovation burns brightest when no one is watching. Its failure nearly bankrupted confidence and creative freedom, but its beauty remains immortal on rewatch. Number 5. The Postman, 1997. After the chaos of Waterworld, Kevin Costner returned to directing with a quiet conviction that he could redeem himself. The Postman was meant to be his grand statement, a post-apocalyptic fable about hope reborn from ruins. Instead, it became the punchline that nearly ended his career. The film told the story of a drifter wandering a collapsed America who dons a postal uniform to deliver letters and inadvertently inspires a revolution. On paper, it was poetic and powerful. On screen, it was bloated and self-indulgent. Costner's commitment to the project turned into obsession. He refused to shorten the running time, insisted on expensive desert reshoots, and demanded complete creative control. Warner Bros. Watched helplessly as the budget ballooned past $80 million. When it finally reached theaters, the backlash was merciless. Critics mocked it as pretentious. Audiences fled. It earned less than $20 million worldwide. Costner went from Hollywood golden boy to cautionary tale. The studio took massive losses and scaled back future epics for years. But decades later, The Postman found new meaning. Fans rediscovered its sincerity, its vision of rebuilding humanity through small acts of courage. It remains a film that tried to speak hope into a cynical world and was punished for dreaming too loudly. Number 4, 47. Ronin, 2013. Universal Pictures wanted a global hit to launch Keanu Reeves into mythic fantasy territory. What they got was one of the most expensive miscalculations in modern history. 47. Ronin tried to fuse Japanese legend with Hollywood spectacle and collapsed under its own confusion. The story of samurai avenging their fallen master is sacred in Japanese culture, but the studio demanded supernatural creatures, dragons, and visual effects. The result alienated both audiences and historians. Director Carl Rinch, a first-timer, struggled to control the chaos. Cost overruns pushed the budget to nearly $200 million. Reeves remained stoic through endless reshoots, but even he seemed lost inside the CGI fog. When it premiered, the reaction was brutal. Critics dismissed it as hollow spectacle with no soul. It made less than half its cost worldwide. Universal executives were humiliated. Plans for a major Japanese franchise vanished overnight. The loss was so severe, it delayed other major projects for years. Yet, time softened its image. 47. Ronin gained quiet admiration for its tragic tone and haunting imagery. Reeves would later resurrect his career through John Wick, but this failure remains the scar that taught studios the cost of cultural misfire, a film too Western for the East and too Eastern for the West. Number 3. The Bonfire of the Vanities, 1990. Warner Bros. Thought they had a masterpiece. Tom Wolfe's best-selling novel about greed and corruption in New York seemed perfect for the big screen. Brian De Palma was hired to direct. Tom Hanks, Melanie Griffith, and Bruce Willis signed on. But what should have been satire turned into cinematic chaos. The story followed a Wall Street tycoon whose life unravels after a hit-and-run accident ignites racial and political tension. The novel's biting irony became heavy-handed on screen. The production was cursed from the beginning. The cast clashed with De Palma. The script was rewritten constantly. Location shoots in Manhattan caused public outrage as entire neighborhoods were blocked off for days. Warner Bros. Poured over $40 million into marketing, but audiences smelled disaster. When it released in 1990, critics eviscerated it, calling it tone-deaf and self-important. The film grossed barely $15 million. Warner Bros. Executives faced internal revolt, and De Palma's reputation never fully recovered. Over time, however, the story of its failure became more famous than the film itself. The making of the Bonfire of the Vanities inspired books, documentaries, and classes on what not to do in Hollywood. It became the perfect symbol of hubris, ambition, and misread culture that can turn gold into ash. Number 2. Battleship, 2012. Universal Pictures believed they could turn a board game into a global action phenomenon. Battleship was supposed to merge military might with sci-fi spectacle, a blockbuster designed to conquer every market. Instead, it sank faster than any ship ever built on screen. The film followed a naval fleet that encounters alien invaders during war games in the Pacific. Directed by Peter Berg and starring Taylor Kitsch, Liam Neeson, and pop star Rihanna, it looked unstoppable on paper. The studio poured over $200 million into production and another $100 million into marketing. They even timed its release to coincide with Navy recruitment campaigns, hoping for patriotic buzz. But when the movie opened, the audience laughed for the wrong reasons. Critics called it a Transformers imitation without charm. Its tone swung wildly between earnest and absurd. Domestically, it bombed, earning just $65 million. Only international markets saved it from total ruin. Still, Universal lost well over $150 million. Executives went silent, and the studio abandoned several planned Hasbro adaptations immediately after. Taylor Kitsch, who had starred in John Carter that same year, found his leading man career crushed by 2 flops back-to-back. Battleship remains the ultimate warning that brand recognition is not storytelling. Sometimes, a game should stay in the box. Number 1. The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964. Samuel Bronston was known for producing massive historical spectacles filmed across Europe with armies of extras and colossal sets. But his grandest dream, The Fall of the Roman Empire, became the film that ended his empire entirely. Starring Sophia Loren, Alec Guinness, and Christopher Plummer, it aimed to rival Ben-Hur in scope. Massive Roman cities were rebuilt in Spain with marble columns, real chariots, and thousands of soldiers. The production stretched across continents and years, devouring $20 million, an astronomical figure in 1964. Bronston ignored warnings from accountants insisting that history would remember his masterpiece. When it premiered, critics praised its visuals, but called it cold and lifeless. Audiences stayed away. It made barely a fraction of its cost. Within months, Bronston's studio collapsed under debt, and his career was over. Ironically, decades later, Ridley Scott's Gladiator borrowed much from its design, proving that art does echo through failure. The Fall of the Roman Empire became legend, not for what it achieved, but for what it destroyed. It marked the end of the grand historical epic until Hollywood dared to dream again, decades later. The marble still stands in ruins outside Madrid, a monument to ambition that outgrew its master. Some films fail quietly and vanish. Others explode so spectacularly that their shockwaves reshape Hollywood itself. These 17 disasters were born from vision excess and blind faith. Yet in every failure, there is something human, the hunger to build something immortal even at the edge of collapse. Which of these cinematic wrecks do you think deserved redemption? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for more forgotten legends of film history.